Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're talking all about Wolves Knicks from Saturday night. The Timberwolves win over New York at Madison Square Garden. We'll talk key takeaways from the first part of the game. The starters played, for the most part, regular rotation guys, first three quarters. We'll talk key takeaways. We'll also talk about key takeaways from the fourth quarter when the deep bench guys got to play and also individual studs and duds. It's all coming to the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. You can download that app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow this show on X. That's at Beecken and also at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. All right, today is the post-game podcast from Saturday evening's preseason game between the Wolves and the Knicks. What I want to do is this will be actually a little bit more like a regular post-game pod that will, of course, start here in just, I don't know, a week and a half, 9 days, something like that before the regular season opener. And what I mean by that is actual key takeaways, because the Wolves rotation guys played for the majority of the first three quarters. I don't think there was anybody outside the regular top 10 in the rotation. Of course, Jaden McDaniels missed the game due to that calf strain that he's been battling for the last week or so. But otherwise, it was rotation guys for the first three quarters. So we can actually take something from this. I think we're starting to see something of what the rotation is going to look like at the start of the regular season, minus McDaniels in this case, of course. And then the fourth quarter was deep bench guys, basically like 11 through 15 or 16 in the rotation. And not only one non-roster guy got into the game. Like, it was mostly guys that we're going to see on the floor for the Wolves this year in the regular season. And so I want to talk about some takeaways there. And of course, we'll do individual studs and duds as we always do at the end of a post-game pod. So we'll get to all that here today. Let's start with some key takeaways. With no McDaniels, of course, Nickeil Alexander-Walker started this game for the Wolves. He was in the starting lineup. And things got off to a relatively slow start. The Wolves were down, I think it was 8-0, 10-2, 12-2, 12-4, something like that. And it was just kind of sloppy. And again, preseason, a lot of the Wolves were generating some open looks from three. They just missed them. And that was kind of early game issues for the Wolves. They settled down as the first quarter went on a nice run. They actually led at halftime by 3, and it was tied after 3 quarters. There were some spotty moments for the rotation guys, but my first takeaway is related to the rotation. Rudy Gobert got the first break for the rotation around the midway point of the first quarter, and we saw Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid play together. Kyle Anderson came into the game. He actually came in. Anderson was actually the first sub because Nickeil Alexander-Walker got into foul trouble early. That was also, by the way, kind of the plague of most of the first quarter was the Wolves were in the penalty very quickly. They were very handsy. And then we ended up with like some ticky-tack calls on Mike Conley and stuff like that. That tends to happen when it, especially with the Wolves, if they carry this rotation of a foul-prone team. Hopefully they don't, but that's what happened early, and it was self-fulfilling prophecy. And the Knicks, it was a parade to the free throw line, and that's really how they got to 30 points in the first quarter, was because of the Wolves' foul troubles defensively. But anyway, Gobert comes in. Gobert goes out, Naz comes in, Cat moves to the 5, and then and Anthony Edwards plays the whole first quarter. Cat comes back in, and then they switch. So Rudy comes back in later in the first quarter, and Rudy sits. So now you've got Rudy comes back, and Cat sits. So now you have Rudy and Naz on the floor together. Second quarter, Cat comes back in at the 8.5 mark. Rudy sits down, Naz stays. So you basically got Naz Reid on the floor from the midway point in the first quarter to a little past the midway point in the second quarter. Just a huge block of minutes consecutively while Cat and Rudy are shuffling in and out. And I don't believe, and I meant to make a note of this and I missed doing it, I don't think Kat and Rudy shared the floor together again in the first half. Maybe at the very end of the first half, end of the second quarter. But it's kind of what we talked about last week on the show is I think we're going to see a lot of this staggering of Rudy and Kat. And we'll see Rudy and Kat playing together for 5-6 minutes at the start of the first and third quarters, maybe towards the end of the second and potentially crunch time in the fourth quarter, pending foul trouble. So like max 12 to 16 minutes a game, probably on the higher end of that, 15, 16 minutes a game together. And then they should each be playing 12-ish minutes without each other, and Naz should be on the floor for those minutes. So that's going to get Naz into the mid-20s in terms of minutes per game, and Kat and Rudy in the upper 20s. That's probably about right. And I'm fudging things a little. I mean, it may be more like 30, and Naz may get 22. But one of my concerns with signing Naz Reid to that extension was, are they actually going to carve out a role for him where he's playing consistently for this team next year? And meaning this year, when, Kat missed 52 straight games and Naz was still only playing 19 minutes a game is what he ended up doing for the season. I believe it was. 18.4 minutes per game last year in 68 contests with no Kat essentially. So like, how do they get him into the 24 minute a game, 26 minute a game range? That's how they're going to have to do it, is he's on the floor for a block of time, late first quarter to mid second quarter, late third quarter to mid fourth quarter. And you're shuffling Rudy and Kat in and out so that they're getting requisite rest. And also kind of trying to match up with whoever the opposing team has on the floor in terms of bigs and what defensive coverage you want to play based on the matchup. So there's obviously other factors in there, but kind of the baseline, the standard, it looks like, is going to be this sort of a rotation. The other thing about the rotation early is Kyle Anderson basically initiated with the second unit. And yes, he was actually on the floor with the rest of the starters after Alexander Walker was in foul trouble. But then when Shake Milton came in the game and he's kind of the de facto backup point guard, he was mostly deferring to Kyle Anderson to run the offense. And point slow-mo is, as we know, really, really good. And even if Shake's bringing the ball up the floor, they're getting it to Anderson to then initiate. That's what happens so often. It's actually a lot of times with the starting unit, what happens when Conley gets the ball to Ant and Ant initiates. That happens quite a bit too. And we saw Kyle Anderson drive and kick out for an open three a couple of different times, where he was driving the seam in the defense, kick to the opposite wing for an open three-pointer. We saw him actually run pick and roll, throw a lob to Rudy at one point. This was an impressive Kyle Anderson game. We'll talk more about that here later in the show. But very, very, very good second unit showing is another takeaway. But also the point here is that Kyle Anderson was basically initiating for that second unit. We'll talk more about Shake Milton too, because he was very good. On the bad side of the ledger, the transition defense for the Wolves was miserable. And we talked a little bit about the foul trouble a couple minutes ago, but transition defense was pretty miserable, especially the starters. The second unit was maybe a little better. It was a recurring theme the last couple of seasons, especially last year. Even 2 years ago, though, it was a little bit shoddy. But last year, transition defense, defensive rebounding, and fouling were the biggest issues for this team on defense. And it's crazy because they were a top 10 defense, right? They finished 10th in defensive rating. But how much better could they have been? Like, the half-court defense was so good last year, but the transition defense has remained terrible, and it was bad again in this game. Guys not getting back. When they do get back, they foul. Mismatches in transition. Guys not getting back to their own. Just not stopping the ball. Like, really high school level stuff at times. Like, it sounds crazy, but that's true. Transition defense to me was pretty bad in this game as well. I want to talk a little bit more about the second unit, and actually we'll do that next, and then we'll get into some of that fourth quarter stuff. But I want to talk about the Shake Milton, Kyle Anderson unit, what was positive about that. Then we'll wrap up the overall takeaways. We'll move into the fourth quarter and talk about like those guys towards the end of the bench that are battling for end of bench spots and roles. How those guys did, the Josh Minets, the Wendell Moores, the Luka Garzas, like all those guys. Jordan McLaughlin played a nice game. We'll get into that. So we'll do all that here later, and then we'll close the show with individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Gametime. If you have a bad habit of waiting till the last minute to purchase tickets for anything, sporting events, comedy, theater, etc., concerts, Gametime is the place for you. And I have that bad habit. I do that far too often. And this is also the time of year, by the way, there's a lot going on. There's some great tours wrapping up. I actually just went to a concert the other day. And playoff baseball, if you live in one of the 4 cities still playing baseball right now, I mean, if you need tickets to those events, Gametime is the place to go. Gametime is actually the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And again, it's any genre of event where you need tickets, sports, music, comedy, theater, etc., all in one spot. All in prices also show you your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy your tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Gametime is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets, as I mentioned, right up to the start of the event. And even an hour after it starts, if you're running late or you're just trying to look for a great deal, it's the best place to get your tickets. The best place to find last-minute seats. Also, they have zone deals. You can pick the section and Gametime picks the seats. You can average an 18% savings there. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, every day, as we're going to continue the player preview series. We'll talk Karl-Anthony Towns on Tuesday, and then Anthony Edwards is the last one we have to get to, so we'll finish the player preview series. There's a couple more preseason games left, so we'll also preview those and do post-game pods for those later in the week. So all that upcoming, and we are 9 days, I think, away from the start of the regular season. So, man, it's happening. It's happening for real. Get excited. All right. Continuing the conversation, the post-game pod from Saturday's show Saturday's game, I should say, against the Knicks. The second unit that I talked about, there were brief moments, by the way. This was like early mid-second quarter, and I think in the third as well, where the Timberwolves went with essentially a no-point guard lineup for brief moments of time where essentially Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Anthony Edwards were initiating. You also had Kyle Anderson on the floor, plus Nasri, Karl-Anthony Towns, but no Shake Milton, no Mike Conley on the floor. That was interesting. I think we'll see some of that depending on, again, so much of this is matchup dependent, opponent dependent. If you want a long, Shake Milton's got like a 7-foot wingspan anyway, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker's even bigger. Anthony Edwards, we know, is a physical monster. Kyle Anderson is big at the 3. Think about that. I mean, Kyle Anderson played a lot of 3 last year, and actually he's going to play. He didn't play a ton of 3. He played more 4 last year. He's going to play a lot more 3 this year. It's just such a big lineup that Chris Finch has the ability to roll out. The second unit, though, in general, was very impressive in this game. And I'm not the biggest fan of individual player single game box score plus minus numbers. They're very noisy. There's so many factors that can influence that. But when it's this drastic, I think it's worth pointing out. Kyle Anderson was a plus 27 in 22 minutes. This is a game the Wolves only won by 9. He was a plus 27 in 22 minutes. Oh, and by the way, it was tied going to the fourth quarter. So this game was tied at the end of 3, and Kyle Anderson didn't play a minute in the fourth quarter. Also, Shake Milton, plus 31, plus minus, 20 in 20 minutes. Shake a plus 31 in 20 minutes. Kyle Anderson a plus 27 in 22 minutes. Crazy numbers. And they really kind of took turns running that offense with the second unit. I talked about Kyle Anderson already. He ended up with 8 assists in 22 minutes in this game, just 1 turnover. Shake Milton had 6 assists in 20 minutes with only 1 turnover. So those 2 guys, essentially the bench point guards, if you will, and we'll talk about Jordan McLaughlin, but I'm only talking about these 2 guys, Anderson and Milton together, 14 assists, 2 turnovers in a combined 42 minutes. That's a fantastic showing. That means that second unit was humming offensively. I was very impressed with how they ran all of that. Midway through the third quarter, the Wolves had Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., and Kyle Anderson on the floor with Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. I thought that was an interesting lineup. At the time, they were down 5. They won their minutes on the floor. That unit ended up, obviously, because Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton were on the floor, right? But that unit of 5 was able to get the Wolves back in the lead when they were down trailing by 5 midway through the quarter. I thought Troy Brown Jr. was fine in this game too. He missed a couple of threes early, but then was pretty good late in the game. He actually did get some run in the fourth quarter with some of the deep bench guys. He's probably the 9th or 10th guy in the rotation right now. And I thought he was good, but that unit was fun. I think it'll be interesting to see. And that's also a big unit, right? Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. in the backcourt. Well, I guess Anthony Edwards technically would be playing the two in that scenario, but that's still a big unit. Shake, Anthony Edwards, Troy Brown Jr., Kyle Anderson, and Karl-Anthony Towns. And it allows Slow-Mo to play the four. I don't think it's a unit we'll see a ton of because, again, Naz is going to play a lot of those minutes. But if Cat can not be in foul trouble, that's something we'll talk about on Tuesday's show. We talk about player preview. He could see some more run with some of those mostly bench combinations. We saw last year, remember there was that period of time where the bench was really struggling and Finch went to Anthony Edwards plus all bench guys, and they were really dominant. That didn't last very long. I think it kind of flipped the other direction, but playing around with some of those combinations, and I don't know that it's as necessary because I think Shake Milton will be far more efficient than, say, Jalen Noel was last year in that bench scorer role, scorer/initiator role. But to be able to kind of buoy that second unit with frontline guys that can dominate against opposing second units will be really a luxury for Chris Finch. And I thought that lineup looked good in this game. Okay, that's pretty much it for my overall takeaways from the part of the game that was really competitive and had starters playing. So I'll just recap them quickly. The rotation notes related to, rotation, I guess, my notes on the rotation related to the bigs, especially like Rudy getting the rest and Cat playing with Naz. That was interesting, and I think we'll see a lot of that this year. The bench unit ran by Shake Milton and Kyle Anderson with Slow-Mo running a lot of the offense. That was a really effective unit. And then we'll talk more about Naz Reid and studs and duds. I should spend just a minute on him now. He was fantastic. He hit 4 threes in the third quarter. I think he ended up, what did he shoot? Make 5 in the game? Yeah, 5 of 8 from outside the arc. Had a nice block defensively. He only had 1 rebound in 19 minutes, but a good Naz game. And then on the bad side of things, the needs improvement, if you will, side of things, transition defense, really bad, especially the starting lineup. Fouling early, just some missed open shots early in the game. The Wolves ended up from 3. They ended up shooting 42%, 41.7, 20 of 48. But they started very cold and they got hot middle of the game. Just consistency there is going to be huge for the team this year. All right, let's cruise right into talking about that fourth quarter and some of these bench guys. And I'm talking deep bench guys. I'm not talking the regular, 10 guys in the rotation, the top 10 guys. So fourth quarter, we saw Jordan McLaughlin play 9 minutes. We saw Wendell Moore Jr. get 11, Luka Garza get 11, Josh Minott get 11. Rookie Leonard Miller played 5 minutes towards the end of the game, and Daishen Nix, non-roster invitee, played 3 minutes at the end of the game. And I was impressed in general with them. The ones that popped the most to me, and actually popped is the word that I wrote down when with Josh Minott. Man, he had a drive that was fantastic, got to the rim. He had another drive that ended in a dunk, and that was it was off an offensive rebound. So the defense was trying to recover and get a contest on him on the 3-point line, and he pump faked and drove. So he had his head and shoulders past the defender right away. Got a dunk on that one. But he had another drive where he laid it in that was impressive. Showed off the athleticism, the length, the size. And then he had a drive and dish where he drove into the paint and dropped it off for a bucket and had an assist. Like, that's playmaking that is any playmaking Josh Minott can do is absolutely gravy. It's not something that the Wolves are expecting to get out of Josh Minott, at least not at this stage in his career, year 2. He was really impressive. I do not know how they're going to keep Josh Minott off the floor this year. He's going to end up, I think, if Troy Brown Jr. gets off to a slow start, Josh Minott's going to eat into those minutes. He's going to have to. And in this game, he was more impressive than Troy Brown Jr., I thought. And Brown's going to be he's a good rotation guy, right? I was excited they got him. But I don't know where else you're going to find minutes for Josh Minott, short of heaven forbid, a Kyle Anderson injury or something like that. Josh Minott was impressive. Jordan McLaughlin, this is the best we've seen him play since early last year before the calf injury. You could even go all the way back to the Memphis playoff series in spring of 22. I mean, I thought McLaughlin before the calf injury last year, first dozen games or so, was also fantastic. He had 8 points, 3 of 5 shooting, 2 of 4 outside the arc. We need to see J-Mac make threes if he's going to have a shot at playing this year. 2 assists, 2 steals, 0 turnovers. So that's the J-Mac we all know and love. In just 9 minutes, he was a plus 14, looked very comfortable, was one of the more experienced guys on the floor at the time, save for like Evan Fournier on the Knicks side. So he should have, been relatively dominant, and he was. He was very, very good. Wendell Moore Jr., not a whole lot to say there. He didn't really impress all that much. Luka Garza looked the part, as he often does, especially on offense, but on the glass was effective. Had 3 assists, a couple of rebounds, missed his only 3-point attempt, got to the line once. And for him, it's just a question of mobility. I think he continues to improve there. Every time we see him, he looks more sleek, more in shape. If he can keep with people defensively, if he gets put in actions on the perimeter, that's his key to playing minutes at the NBA level. And I thought he looked the part in this game. He looks the part of a fifth big on an NBA roster with pinch, being able to pinch hit, fourth big minutes or whatever if there's injuries or foul trouble. And this was an impressive performance from Luka Garza. Leonard Miller, also good. Hit a three-pointer, looked very in rhythm, natural, like 4 or 5 feet beyond the arc. Knocked it down, had a couple of boards, had a nice block. An impressive 5-minute stint for Leonard Miller. The depth on this team is real, and that's something we'll talk a little bit more about as we get closer to the season. But this team has serious depth, and wasn't the case last year. I thought it was at the start of the year. I was wrong. This year, I think there's more proven depth and there's more upside depth with guys like Josh Minott. Weirdly, it's both, right? I think the 9-man depth with Leonard Miller, with Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., it's better. It's better depth. And then the deeper depth has more upside. It's not, the Bryn Forbes of the world and Austin Rivers and, guys who, Nate Knight, guys who just didn't do much when they got the opportunity, and there wasn't a whole lot of upside. Leonard Miller, Josh Minott, even Wendell Moore to an extent. These guys all have Luka Garza, have some upside, and can really impress when given the opportunity. All right, let's close the show here today by getting into individual studs and duds overall. I don't have any starters on this list. I also don't have any of the fourth quarter deep guys. They're all going to be bench guys. And let's break down some of their lines in the box score and what they were able to provide in this game. That's how we'll close the show out here today. Today's episode is brought to us by Betterhelp. It's sponsored by Betterhelp. If you are struggling at all with mental health, Betterhelp is the best place where you can go to get online therapy. And if you ever feel like your brain is getting in its own way, I know, at times during COVID, especially I struggle with this, but even now, as we get into the fall and the winter, if you're staying indoors more, whatever that might be, and you've just noticed yourself, not knowing what you should do, feel like there's something more, something you need to do to kind of get yourself out of a funk. BetterHelp is a place that can really provide that help. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Simply fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. All right, let's close the show here today by talking about individual studs and duds from the game. When we're talking studs, we have to start with that fantastic bench unit in this game. And let's start with Naz Reid. We didn't talk about him much earlier. He led the team with 22 points. It was second in the game next to RJ Barrett's 23 for the Knicks. But Naz had 22 on 8 of 12 shooting, 5 of 8 outside the arc, hit his first, I think, 4 3-point attempts, and was just really efficient from the field, was just 1 of 2 from the line. He did only have the 1 rebound in 19 minutes, and that's been along one of the issues with Naz his first couple years in the league. That was my biggest concern. It's one of the reasons why I was a little skeptical of an eventual breakout for him. Obviously, I was wrong in general, and also specific to rebounding. Last year was by far Naz's best rebounding year of his career. He actually rebounded the ball well enough to be a rotation big. But we got to be careful he's got to be careful. The Wolves have to be careful that he doesn't backslide into what he was doing his first couple years in the league. He's obviously more mobile now, and he understands where he needs to be and when, defensively especially. He actually had 0 defensive rebounds in 19 minutes. And as a team, this continues to be something I'm worried about. I mean, it was a net 0 rebound game. Each team had 40 boards in this one. But that's something I'll talk about with Karl-Anthony Towns on Tuesday's show related to the player preview. His rebounds were down last year. He struggled in this game, I thought, to grab defensive rebounds. Cat did. But Naz, 19 minutes, 0 defensive rebounds, just 1 offensive board, which was off of his own miss, by the way. So in 19 minutes, the only rebound he got was essentially playing volleyball, Kevin Love style, with his own miss at the rim, and ended up scoring. Obviously, that's important. But we got to see more on the glass from him. In general, though, a strong performance. 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 block, a couple of turnovers for Naz. But seeing the 22 off the bench from him was great. We talked about Shake Milton. He was really good. 12 points on 5 of 8 shooting, 2 of 4 outside the arc. created some shots for himself a little bit. And Chris Finch has talked quite a bit about how impressed he's been with Shake Milton's ability to do just that so far in his brief amount of time in a Wolves uniform. But 12 points, 6 assists, 2 rebounds, only 1 turnover. And as mentioned earlier, a plus 31 in the plus minus column. Didn't get to the line at all. I worry a little bit about the Jaylen Nowell effect of maybe a little too much mid-range, not enough getting to the line. Shake's better at getting to the rim than Jaylen Nowell has been, and he is less likely to settle for those mid-range jumpers, although he did it a couple of times in this game. He's also simply a better three-point shooter. And I don't want to spend all year comparing him to Jaylen Nowell, but those comparisons will come early because he's effectively filling that role. And I just think he's a much better, certainly more proven version. Absolutely better than what Jaylen Nowell was last year. Could he be more of what Jaylen Nowell was 2 years ago? Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably what's going to happen. And remember, Jaylen Nowell was legitimately good when he got minutes 2 years ago. But last year, replacing Nowell's lack of production with real production and a veteran presence and somebody who can be the straw that stirs that drink off the bench in Shake Milton is going to be really important. Straw that stirs the drink, Shake. Yeah. I wish I could say I planned that out before I said it, but there we go. We'll just leave it there. I should have just rolled with it. Anyway, my last stud in this game after Shake and Naz Reid has to be Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson, very, very good in this game, as we talked about. 6 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds, made all 3 of his shots. He had a nice floater. He had a little, actually a couple of floaters, little push shot near the paint. Didn't attempt any threes. The Knicks kept leaving him open above the break for potential 3-point shots. Remember, we talked about this in the player preview about a week ago with Slow-Mo. Really good from the corners, 3-point attempt-wise, not good above the break. Teams know that. And Kyle Anderson's only going to shoot that shot. He's going to pick his spots, right? But it's hard to have a better game on such low volume shooting the ball than Kyle Anderson did. 6 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds in just 22 minutes. At least a couple of those rebounds were nice contested rebounds too. A plus 27 in those 22 minutes. Really impressive. I'm only doing 3 studs. Jordan McLaughlin, we talked about already, would probably be next on that list. The starters, I haven't really spent much time on their individual performances. Real quickly, nobody's a dud in the starting lineup. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the foul trouble wasn't great. He actually was on minus 25 in 17 minutes. But I thought he did some good things. He missed his first few threes, but then he made one off some nice ball movement from, I think it was Ant to Cat into the corner to Alexander-Walker for a made 3. Rudy was good. 9 boards in 22 minutes. He impacted the game defensively, had a really nice steal that ignited a break where Ant got an and 1. He had 4 points, 9 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 steals, only 1 turnover for Rudy. That was fine. Obviously, you want him to shoot more than once, but he also only played 22 minutes. Cat had 17, 5, and 3. He did have 3 turnovers, was a little frantic at times, almost to some stray voltage moments early. Did end up with 4 fouls in 27 minutes, but in general, I thought he played well. Same with Ant. He was only 6 of 18 shooting, 3 of 9 outside the arc. But you look up and he's got 17 and 8, and he was good defensively. Like, he was locking down his matchup more often than not. Generally a good performance. Conley was quiet in this game, but fine. Other guys off the bench, like, nobody had a bad game per se. Like, Wendell Moore would have loved to do more with his 11 minutes. Sure. I thought he was fine. If I had to pick one, it's probably Alexander-Walker. But in general, everybody played well. So there's no duds for this game. Just a well-rounded victory for the Timberwolves. And again, 3 quarters, they played the Knicks to a draw. And without Jaden McDaniels, I thought the main rotation guys all played pretty well. So good to see. And just a couple more preseason games left too. So we'll get to those here later in the week as well. All right, that's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show's free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today and on either one of those devices. You can also follow on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Beecken and at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.